what happens from 2000 to now? What happened really in the last decade? The last decade comes after the 90s, where really the major opening for peace took place. And there was a real opportunity to make peace. I'm sure you know it, the Oslo Accords, there was peace with Jordan, came very close to peace with the Palestinians. And against this backdrop, the right becomes very violent and very fearful, certainly in its most extreme forms. One major manifestation of that is the assassination of Prime Minister Rabin in 1995, which was pushing the country towards a peace agreement with the Palestinians. The right becomes very fearful of where the left is taking the country, and the left is determined to finally put peace on the table and get a final agreement. So Ehud Barak, who's the prime minister at the time, leading a labor-led government, in 2000 goes to Camp David under President Clinton and says, we're going to end it. I'm going to go as far and further than any prime minister, any Israeli has gone before. The West Bank, the Gaza, East Jerusalem is going to go to the Palestinians. In return, what I want is what he called end of conflict, end of claims. This is the end of it. This is real peace. The Palestinians are not going to come back and say, oh, there's one more thing we forgot. So the notion is end of conflict, end of claims. The negotiations fail. There have been numerous books written about it. You ask anyone who was there, everyone tells their own story. So there's actually no one explanation as to why it failed. And to this date, there's people arguing on why it failed. But it failed spectacularly. And after that point, the whole area descends into a very, very murderous cycle of violence known as the Second Intifada. And I'm sure you remember the pictures of the time, the blown up buses in shopping malls and city centers, a very, very violent cycle between Israelis and the Palestinians. And this breaks the back of the left. And I can say it also from my personal perspective. In the 90s, we were so hopeful. We thought that finally, if we did go the way of territorial compromise, there will be peace. And not only did these negotiations fail, but this descent into violence is one that makes a lot of people who believed in peace and believed in territorial compromise begin to ask themselves a key question, which is, what is this conflict really about? A person on the left would say, just a minute, I thought this conflict was about the fact that the Palestinians did not have an independent state and that they wanted an independent state in the West Bank and Gaza. But given the opportunity to have that, they didn't take hold of the opportunity. And not only did they not take hold of it and kind of said, just a moment, we want to just renegotiate something small. This descent into violence, a lot of people on the left started to say, well, maybe this is not a conflict about territorial compromise or national independence. Maybe more than the Palestinians want a state for themselves, they don't want the Jewish people to have a state in the same area. So what you have through this decade is a very skeptical, very broken left that believed in this idea of territorial compromise and peace, and suddenly finds itself very, very skeptical of whether this is at all possible and what the intentions of the other side really are. And what you have is people on the left who, if you told them tomorrow morning, this is the deal, the Palestinians get a state in the West Bank and Gaza, East Jerusalem is the capital, this is the end of conflict, end of claims, do you sign? They will sign. That hasn't changed, the basic position. But what has changed is that a lot of people don't believe in it anymore, don't believe that it's possible, have become very skeptical. What happened on the right at the same time is that Ariel Sharon, who was a prime minister of the Likud from the right, and for many years the father of the settlement movement to settle the West Bank and Gaza, decides as prime minister that even though he doesn't believe peace with the Palestinians is possible, for its own good, Israel should get out of initially Gaza and ultimately the West Bank unilaterally. And Ariel Sharon, who for years supported the settlement movement, turns against it, and in the summer of 2005, again, I'm sure you remember the images, pulls out completely from the Gaza Strip. Not only the military, the settlements, the houses are destroyed, and Israel leaves the Gaza Strip completely. So the right also during this decade becomes broken because they feel that the country no longer supports their own prime minister, one of their own, no longer supports the idea of greater Israel and expansion and settlements. So what you have through this decade is that the borders between right and left have nearly disappeared. And what you have is almost this big blob in the center, where the parties that you met today, in many ways, all belong to it. And some people here mentioned that it was interesting for you to see that even though you met people from different parties, you sometimes heard the same things. So you have today, in a sense, even though there are different parties and they're still officially called left and right, you have this really big centrist blob, which is the result of people being much less certain about that where they're going and that their opinions are right, and it's clear. So this has marked this decade, which is why also politically you're saying odd things like Ehud Barak, the leader of the Labour Party, with Netanyahu, the leader of the Likud right party, jointly in government, leading a joint government, and the opposition party, Kadima, which is a new party created during this decade precisely against the background of the breaking down of left and right borders, created by Ariel Sharon and Shimon Peres coming together, so Likud and Labour coming together. So if you think of it, it's actually kind of odd. The government is led by a coalition of Likud and Labour, and the opposition is a party that was created by Likud and Labour. And that is one of the reasons that Israeli politics today is in many ways very centrist. Now, you were late here because of being stuck in traffic, because of demonstrations against the settlement freeze. So something interesting might be happening right now, which is perhaps new lines dividing the right and the left are emerging, and they are emerging against the possibility that a peace agreement might be back on the table. As long as people thought that it was not on the table, not possible, never going to happen, not in my lifetime, there was really no sense to make of a dividing line between left and right. The possibility that it will come back brings back kind of the old defining lines, and the demonstrations of the kind that you've seen or passed by right now are demonstrations of the right, which were characteristics of the height of the 90s, when Rabin was trying to make peace with the Palestinians, characteristic of the disengagement. So whenever a major move is being made towards some form of agreement, that's when you're beginning to see the left and the right camps come to life again. So this is a bit of where we are today, emerging from a decade, a very centrist decade, where both the right and the left have been very broken, very skeptical, very uncertain, to the possibility that we are returning into clear defining lines, but it remains to be seen.